All right, welcome everyone to the third annual Radiology Artificial Intelligence Fireside Chat. My name is Paul Yee. I'm a radiologist from the University of Maryland, co-host of the Radiology AI podcast, and we're thrilled to be here tonight to talk about all sorts of the hottest topics in AI and radiology.
My name is Tejani. I'm a radiology resident at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center and co-host of the podcast. It's so great to see you all. We have a great show in store for you with our expert panel here, and we are going to be putting ChatGPT to the test. So hopefully everyone here is ready to interview it and give it a hard time, because that's exactly what we're about to do as well.
And we want this to be very interactive. We'll certainly be interacting with ChatGPT. Our panelists will be maybe interacting with the responses, but we'll have plenty of time for audience Q&A, and so we'll get things started.
So let's start with some introductions. We'll be joined shortly by Dr. Linda Moy, editor at Radiology. We have Dr. Charles Kahn, editor of Radiology Artificial Intelligence. Dr. Andreas Rauschecker, co-director at the UCSF Center for Intelligent Imaging. Dr. Felipe Kitamura, director of Applied Innovation and AI at DASA in Brazil. And Dr. Florence Doe, director of innovation at the University of Maryland Medical Intelligent Imaging Center. So thank you all for being here. Paul, I think let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, so obviously AI is huge. We're here in the AI theater and the AI section, and generative AI has created quite a stir, whether it's ChatGPT or DALL-E. And the age-old question is, will AI replace radiologists? So we thought it might be interesting to see what would happen if we interview ChatGPT for radiology residency. So Ali and I started our own fictional, but maybe soon coming radiology residency. So we have our first applicant, aptly named ChatGPT, often confused with other ChatGPTs, applying for diagnostic radiology.
It's a generated image, already kind of judging the attire here, not necessarily professional for a radiology residency interview, if you ask me.
Well, party up top or party down. All right, so the first question we always like to start with is something a little more personal. Let's break the ice. So tell me a hilarious joke about radiology. Let's see how ChatGPT does. So why did the radiologist break up with his girlfriend?
Because she had too many issues, and he could see right through her. The emojis are interesting. I didn't expect the emojis, I'm not gonna lie. All right, not bad.
Yeah, it's all right.
I've heard better. So then we want to know, why is ChatGPT applying to radiology residency? So we ask it, why do you want to be a radiologist? And it's been a long day of interviews, too.
Yeah, so we're prompting it,
tired.
Make sure to keep it interesting, right? So pretty wordy, right?
I'm starting to zone out a little bit, I'm not going to lie. Getting a little tired. I think I heard that statement in an earlier sentence, earlier conversation. I wonder if it's eavesdropping from our other applicants here.
Well, I think after the emojis, ChatGPT thought they played safe, right? Maybe bring it back a little more conservative. But man, this guy's got to read the room, right? Pretty long.
We'll let you take a look at the text here. I don't think we have enough time in the session to go through the entire statement, but it's trying. It's working really hard, I can say that.
Yeah, so maybe something a little more substantive. So how many of you are radiology residents? Raise of hands. All right. For those of you who are R3s or higher, you're going to take something called the core exam. So we thought we'd ask it, ChatGPT, it's supposed to be this genius wonder kid. How will it do on a question about digital images and how long it would take to complete transmission? Kind of a core informatics topic. And holy smokes, this applicant is fast.
And it shows his work. I like that. Thorough. And we have the right answer here, Paul.
Is it? I probably would have gotten that one wrong.
I think it is. Let's try an easier one. Go a little softer on our applicant here.
So a patient is suspected of having kidney stones. What is the most appropriate exam?
I like that it's thorough. I could have gone with just ACT, but this is good too. And so, Paul,
Yeah.
I think this opens a conversation about how we're starting to see performance of these models on standardized exams. We see a lot of papers in radiology and radiology artificial intelligence. We've even started seeing it in languages beyond English.
Yeah, it's super interesting. But I am curious, for Felipe Kitamura, informatics extraordinaire, director of innovation, AI, everything at DASA. What do you think about this ability to answer these questions about informatics, about image transmission speeds? What's your take on this?
I think that's a very good question, and thanks for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure and very exciting to be here. we actually did perform a study on that to understand if ChatGPT is able to get questions right. We started to see studies like that for the USMLE and also for the American board, which was also published in the Radiology journal. So we wanted to know, would that happen if we give ChatGPT questions in Portuguese as well? And we were wondering that because for some contents, ChatGPT is very, very good, like it is in English, in Portuguese as well. But for other things, we get better responses in English if we compare to Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. So this was the main thing that we wanted to test, and it's impressive that it was able to pass the exam for the radiology and diagnostic imaging, the mammogram exam as well, and the neuroradiology one. And those are the actual exams that were applied to the residents last year by the Brazilian College of Radiology. They make those exams available, so we were able to test it. And the other interesting finding is that ChatGPT gets it right more often depending on how you prompt. If you just give them the raw questions, they get it right about 60-70% of the time. But we tested 5 prompting styles, and the one that was the best one was QAPG, which is just asking ChatGPT to come up with the best question that would increase the probability that it would get the question right. And then using that question that ChatGPT generated, you put that in the exam, and you do that for each of the questions of the exam. And that increases about 5 or 10% the correct responses.
I'll turn to our panel then. Any thoughts on where we're headed in terms of seeing these large language models essentially take the test, at least these non-image components, the more text-based questions? Are we seeing certain trends? Is there anything to worry about? Are the tests too easy? What are we seeing?
So hi everyone, I'm Linda Moy, the editor of Radiology. So we actually published a couple of articles on this. It turns out that ChatGPT, they're very good with the lower level order questions, which is the polling is the best test. But then if you change the question to higher order level, which I think all of us show with residents, how do you define frequently versus occasionally versus something that it becomes a little bit more of combining a thought and then generating a conclusion. It didn't do as well. GPT-4 does better. And then we did another study where we had ChatGPT go ahead and predict the diagnosis for our diagnosis, please. So just 2 comments. One was going back to what Felipe said, it is much better by the time we threw in the 200th case of diagnosis, please, compared to 50. So it learns very quickly. The other thing I had learned was that with a diagnosis, please, with much more detailed information, it got better. So I'm thinking it can probably summarize some of the text from the EMRs where I think it's going. But you go back to the questions for the CME, it didn't recognize you say which of the following is not associated. It didn't recognize the word not.
That's fascinating. And I think we have enough information here. So Felipe, since you let us, pass or fail, what do you think? Did we make the ChatGPT pass this task?
I think so, right?
All right, we'll take it. On to the next one. So radiology residents publish, and publish quite a bit in some cases. So ChatGPT, can you publish articles in radiology and radiology artificial intelligence?
And this time we're asking it to limit the response to 4 bullet points because we don't want a novel.
We have 3 applicants waiting. We don't have time to wait around here.
Yeah, nobody got time for that.
It's okay. Take your time.
Well, it's very self-aware.
We like thoughtful responses. It's a little bit after lunch. Tryptophan's kicking in.
Yeah, so I guess ChatGPT cannot independently author or publish articles in academic journals like Radiology or Radiology AI. Human authorship is obviously required along with oversight, but it can assist researchers, and any article submitted to these journals need to adhere to the ethical guidelines and standards set by the publication. So for our esteemed editors of Radiology AI, what is the official RSNA Journal Suite policy on large language model use, and how did you come to that set of policies?
I can start. Hi, everybody. I'm Chuck Kahn. Well, first off, ChatGPT cannot be an author of a manuscript. It doesn't have authority. It's not an agent. It's just taking words and stringing them together. Someone has to be responsible for that content, and that is a human. So actually, by policy, for all of our RSNA journals, ChatGPT cannot be listed as an author and cannot be participant. And in fact, if you use ChatGPT, we ask you to, or some other large language model, we ask that you declare that and indicate that to the editors in your cover letter. Now, we won't exclude your paper. We won't look at it. In many ways, people are using these large language models in the same way they use spell check or some grammar checking. And people have used them to, particularly for non-native English speakers, to be able to use that to improve, one hopes, the quality of the language in their paper. So that's part of it. We also have some limitations around its use by reviewers and editors, in that when you submit a paper to one of our journals, that is a confidential piece of information. You are providing us with your work that has not been made public. And putting that into, saying, hey, I'm going to take the text from that paper, put it into ChatGPT and, have it write the review for me. And maybe it'll tell me if there's some papers out there in the literature. That is a violation of the confidentiality of that the author has entrusted us at the journals with. So reviewers and editors cannot use ChatGPT or any public large language model to analyze a manuscript.
That reminds me, I have to go home and adjust some of my papers after this session. Thank you, Dr.
Yes, please do.
I don't want to repeat what Chuck said. I would say that we follow what's called the ICMJE guidelines, and as well as some of the leading societies such as there's WAMI and there's JAMA. So I put together an LLM publications policy. We presented this at the Editors Forum in August, and this has been adopted by many of the other medical imaging journals. We recognize it's a fast-moving field and that we'll go ahead and update it every 6 months or so.
And so are authors submitting official disclosures now? Are we seeing any trends there, or should we be seeing any trends there in the future?
Well, I'll tell you, for radiology, one of the initial questions is, did you use LLMs? And we ask them how have they used it. If it's for improving, writing, grammar and stuff, that's fine. But anything else, we do expect to have a detailed explanation in the cover letter as well as into the materials and methods.
And I think, as many people know too, and we've seen examples of it, the so-called hallucination phenomenon, that it will, if it doesn't know what else to put in, it will make something up and do it very convincingly. So you've heard the story of the lawyer who has been disbarred for submitting a brief where for which he used ChatGPT, and the citations of case law that were in the brief were entirely fictitious. We know it's done that with other things too. So it really requires some thoughtful attention. There are things where it's appropriate to use it and some things not. One other to be aware of is that the public models, such as ChatGPT, have been trained typically through 2021. So you can't ask them about things that are happening in the news today, or they won't know the literature up to they'll know the literature through 2021, but they really won't know things beyond that. So again, you have to be careful how you use they're powerful tools. You have to be careful how you use them.
So as we see more focus on AI in the radiology literature, papers being submitted certainly to radiology and radiology AI, roughly what percentage of papers are you seeing now that use large language models, multimodal kind of generative models, et cetera, either as a topic of study or maybe in the methods?
So I guess I'll give some background. I would say about 30% of all submissions are AI related. and that's been steadily increasing. I think a few years about 20%, and I think this is across the board for all the RSNA journals. Specifically, new things like transformers, BERT, LLMs, that now probably accounts for about, I'd say, a third of the AI papers. So part of it's very trendy. We in Radiology have something called research letter, which is sort of a longer abstract. So I've now been inundated about 30 or 40 of them looking at GPTV, divisions. So I would say that there's a huge interest in them. And of note, these LLMs are actually the ones that we do podcasts on are just through the roof. People want to know how to use them.
I would say at this point for us, it's maybe 5 to 10% of our submissions to the Radiology AI journal are related to large language models and their use.
So we heard GPT-4V. Paul, I have an idea.
Yeah?
I think it's time to see, well, we can't publish research, right? ChatGPT can't really help us there. But maybe it can help us out in the reading room. I don't know. Do you want to check it out?
Yeah, I'm an MSK radiologist, so I can use the help here.
Well, there's a little bit of neuroradiology here, so let's give it one interesting case, just a little more complex.
Yeah, let's do it. I just see something in the brain.
We have some neuroradiologists here on our panel as well, so we'll take a look in just a moment. Now, our guests have not seen these images, so we'll be interested to hear your thoughts in just a moment. So we want to simulate a readout. We're asking the model to give us a differential, look at the sequences, the anatomy, to think through its findings, and let's see what it gives us. It's a pretty tough case, so it's okay to take some time.
Could be.
Okay, and we have some results, some thoughts coming in here.
So it says it's an MRI. I think that is true.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Sequence. T1 weighted post-contrast scan.
Looks pretty good to me
Bright
too.
appearance of the blood vessels. Potential enhancement of the lesions, giving us a sneak preview.
Differential's a little interesting.
Yeah, so we got glioma, high grade such as a GBM, and it gives some rationale for that. Metastasis, a secondary tumor from another origin, or abscess, or the ever popular infectious process. Very nonspecific, along with a disclaimer, these are general observations, etc.
I give that disclaimer in the reading room often myself, so I understand.
Yeah, I'm going to plead the fifth on that.
Dr. Rauschecker, what do you think?
Hi, everyone. I mean, first of all, I think it's astounding that we're talking about this and that it can, output something based on a medical image that we have to look at closely to see whether it makes sense or not. It's not obviously wrong on all accounts. There's a lot of things it got right. I think it recognized this image as a brain MRI. It recognized that it needed to describe the anatomy that it sees. It recognized that it needs to look at the signal properties of this lesion to identify what it is, describe it, and then that it needs to output a differential diagnosis, that the diagnosis may not be certain right away. So these are all pretty astounding things. I don't think it's ready for prime time, right, for radiology. I think it probably left out some important differential diagnoses, and probably most importantly, the answer should have been, I can't make a diagnosis based on one single slice of a 2:1 post-contrast image. I think that sort of plays to the idea of both hallucinations as well as titrating levels of certainty more closely, which I think as radiologists, we have a lot of expertise in that, not just in the form of hedging, but really also thinking about how will our level of certainty about something affect patient management, and that's something that I don't see reflected at all in GPT-4V's answers to these kinds of things. But I will point out, as George G noted in a talk earlier today that some of you might have listened to, OpenAI is not really trying to solve the radiology problem at all. And here we're giving it a complex medical image, and it's reasonable, right? It's giving a reasonable answer. And if you would have asked me, 4 or 5 years ago, is is this sort of technology ready? Is AI ready for sort of prime time and analyzing images and outputting a radiology report? I would have laughed at you. And now we're seriously talking about it. And so things have happened very quickly, and it's exciting to see where this goes into the future.
It's definitely a challenging case, and so the history here for this is a completely de-identified, publicly available case, by the way, was tumor-factor demyelination, but I like your answer much better. It's one image, it's just not enough to make a diagnosis, but maybe ChatGPT is a little confident. I think it's a little strong in its abilities. It really wants to prove itself, so let's try one more question just to see how it does.
All right, so we're gonna give it some more information, and we'll do another case here.
Here we're going to give it some history. It's a middle-aged woman with hearing loss. It's okay, take your time. I see MRI. We're on the right track.
Yeah, T2 weighted sequence.
Huh, interesting.
I'll take your word
Nope.
for that.
Nope. No words there.
MSK.
Huh, interesting. It's thinking, it's processing, it's making a hedge.
Well, it's that left side. I know
Stop.
that's wrong.
All right, how did we do on the second try?
All right, not having read through the whole thing, it looks like the differential diagnosis here is vestibular schwannoma, which I think is reasonable, meningioma, and metastatic lesion, a very classic differential in neuroradiology, so that's pretty good. I think it got the pulse sequence incorrect. It was a T1 post-contrast image, but again, just the fact that it's trying to identify the sequence, knowing that that's important to creating the differential diagnosis, and then describing the anatomy and the location of the, identifying that there's an abnormality and where it is and the characteristics of it, and then coming up with a pretty reasonable differential diagnosis, tying that in with the clinical history. Pretty impressive, I'd say.
Well, we decided to replicate real life interview styles, and so I asked the same question 3 times rapid fire to see if it changes its mind. So let's see how it did on reproducibility. I didn't lie. I asked it rapid fire 3 times in succession, and let's take a look here. So similar differential the first time. Interesting. See a T2 is still persisting that this is a T2 image. Interesting. Okay. It changed its mind on the second try. This is a T1 after the administration of contrast. But it changed its mind on the differential. Going more towards the posterior fossa, it looks like, with medulloblastomas, ependymomas, and hemangioblastomas. Let's see if it can stay consistent. Nope, changed its mind back to T2 weighted imaging. Okay, that's okay. And back to the differential, but I don't know. I'm still a resident. I don't know if I've ever called Meniere's disease or labyrinthitis on an MRI, but I'm also just a resident. So what do you think, Dr. Rauschecker?
Yeah, this is obviously one of the big concerns in using technologies like this is their stochastic nature. If you're asking sort of, is it ready for prime time? This is one of the major reasons it's not, right? So you would not want the same algorithm given the same prompt or the same input to have different outputs, if you ask it 3 or 4 different times. And certainly, some of those are clearly incorrect differential diagnoses, and which is, concerning in and of itself. And so, it speaks to the point that that while these algorithms are powerful, there's a lot of work left to do. I think this particular algorithm, GPT-4V, has only been around for a few months now, and yet they're not trying to specifically work on radiology. So it is already impressive what it can do, but obviously it still makes mistakes, and there are still reasons to be to be cautious in using it, and certainly not ready for prime time. I think these technologies will continue to get better and better. And some of the sort of technical challenges will be overcome for sure, and I'm sure they will continue to get more impressive for radiology images in particular. But that doesn't mean that still doesn't take away that these powerful technologies need a lot of human oversight, because I think there's a big difference between analyzing some images and outputting a description of the pathology and our job as there's still a big gap there left to fill, and happy to talk about that more if we have time.
No, that's wonderful. And actually, I forgot to point out earlier, if we look at that second example, we actually took the history out this time and the differential change. So I wonder, it'd be interesting to see if we could place some attention on the input to see where the model is actually using its logic or deriving its logic from to address certain parts of the prompt. So any of our panelists, any thoughts on the use of ChatGPT 4B? Could be your own experience, what you're seeing in article submissions and practice in the literature.
So, hi, I'm Flo, and I'm working with Paul over at University of Maryland. We have been looking into ChatGPT 4 Vision, and I think one of the challenges is how people are using it as well, right? So it's not just radiologists, and that's part of the scary bit, is some patients are using it, uploading their own images and not recognizing that it's going out into a public database that is then reused. It was really interesting in this reproducibility also, right? As people are getting that information, the hallucination is a little bit dangerous, but I think the confidence that it gives us and how we interpret that as in society and as patients, I can only imagine my mother using this, right, and saying, "Oh, look at what this person said. Why do you disagree?" Right? And the computer's not always right. It's one of those things that we should be very conscious of. And one of the things we also pointed out was the amount of data that it has updated to. Now that it has access to the internet, now that people are using it, it is trained and it keeps refreshing its model. So even if we're getting one result today and it just in this repetitive thing, we may not get it tomorrow. And I'm really conscious about how people are using this in products, how people are thinking about it as they're innovating, and how we can think about that in our research papers that need some reproducibility in our research. So I do wonder how that times out. I mean, that's a whole different conversation of how things age out, but I think it's very quick in comparison to other research things that are more rigid and thought out methodology.
I just want to add that the papers I see are quick and dirty. So 90% is really just one image. And then in their test set, it's some other cases that you can find on the internet. So that's my biggest complaint. You know, you are not really testing it on images it hadn't seen before, and anime requests that. And the author's like, "Oh no, it's too much work. You know, this is just preliminary." But, you know, you can't have data contaminations and pat yourself on the back and say, "Yes, I did great."
And as many of you are probably noticing from this, one of the things that it does is it gives you the diagnosis with certainty, even though it changes its mind. And one of the most challenging problems actually in AI is building systems that know their own limits and being able to incorporate uncertainty and being able to take findings. And in fact, Andreas, one of the works that he's involved in is using, for example, deep learning to identify findings and then using a different AI technology that uses reasoning under probability, under uncertainty, to actually allow explanation of the work and to be able to have the model incorporate that degree of uncertainty. And you're right, I mean, this is challenging. When I'm faced with these, I have a 3-year-old granddaughter who is extremely verbal, very fluent. She puts together sentences, you think she's a 6-year-old, but she is a 3-year-old. And her her world experience and her understanding of the world is that of a 3-year-old. And when I kind of look at ChatGPT, even more recent, as kind of in the same light, because we have a tendency to mistake fluency and the ability to put words together with understanding of what those words mean. And I was at a presentation at the MICI conference out in London back now, and Jan LeCun, who's one of the developers of the original convolutional neural nets and an expert in deep learning, is rather soured on generative models such as GPT and Exil, in large part because they aren't able to plan, they can't reason, they don't have a knowledge of the world that they can draw upon. So I think that it's a phenomenal tool, and I agree with that. It's like if you told us this is there was a movie with Peter Sellers, it was Being There, where it was this guy who was a gardener, Chauncey Gardner, and he became president of the United States. They had this technology where he was speaking and the words were appearing in typescript on a monitor. And you looked at it and went, "Oh my God, that's amazing that AI can do that. Maybe in the near future it will." And of course, we all use this technology every day. this gives us kind of an inkling as to where we're going. It's amazing that it can even get close, right? But I think we all recognize there's some danger with it too.
You're a very, very kind interviewer, Dr. Khan. I can say that much. Our applicant's blushing.
Well, the applicant hasn't started in our radiology residency yet, so this is pretty good from just coming in the door from cyber med school here.
So let's say we let him into radiology residency, and let's say we put it through his paces. At what point are we ready to let him practice independently? Or in other words, what's the bar that we have to have as radiologists when you would actually trust it?
Did I hear?
Or is there a bar?
Did I hear practice independently? Or
Let me backtrack.
because that bar would be very high.
What are the levels of trust that you would allow it to maybe operate? And what are the bars for those?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the dangers have been pointed out already, and I'll just reiterate on something that Dr. Khan mentioned, which is this sort of decoupling of fluency with actual understanding of the concepts, and I think that's a really dangerous place to be, right? Making something sound really good does not mean it's correct, and in our typical world, those usually go hand in hand. If something sounds pretty good, it's more likely to be correct, and that's much less true of these models, and makes it difficult sometimes to spot mistakes, especially when you combine it with hallucinations and sort of lack of its own awareness of its abilities. So I think, in that sense, there has to be a lot of oversight. There has to be a lot of testing. One of the, challenges in radiology, which I think is an interesting sort of one that would be interesting to experiment with, is the long tail of radiology that Dr. Khan wrote about some years ago, where there are many rare diseases that sort of add up to a lot of the imaging we do, and we, as radiologists, as expert radiologists, have to be aware of those, have to be able to recognize them. So, do these models do well on those? What if we fine-tune the models on radiological images? Would there even be enough data on these rare diseases for them to become robust at them? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it has to be explored before we let them loose on real data. And there are many similar challenges like that.
Would you be willing to take this candidate and train it, and let's say it produced those answers, and you said, well, actually, no, this is the diagnosis, here are the features you need to look for. Do you think you could treat this like you would treat a resident?
It's an interesting question, and again, just the fact that anyone has to think about that is kind of astounding, right? That the answer is not obviously no. I think there's many reasons that it's not quite ready for that yet, but who knows what the next 5 years will bring, right?
I think that's very well said. And real quick before we move on to our next task here for the model, Dr. Moy, you talked about how we're seeing quite a bit of training here from the internet, right? And one thing that I always think about are biases, because we've seen how when we don't prompt the model with pronouns, we can see in the response sometimes they'll add pronouns, and you start to wonder, well, geez, is it pulling on gender connotations or roles that it's pulling from this training data that we may not know about? Well, what if I gave this model a chest CT and the chest CT had hilar lymphadenopathy? Could it come back and say this is a female patient, maybe African American, to pull on any associations that may be latent but not true in real life for our patient? And this is for anyone in the panel.
I'll just make it brief because I love to hear what Felipe says. But yes, I think LLMs are actually more prone to AI bias than all the other algorithms we've been working on.
Yeah, I agree. And the tests we have made so far show, and I'm not sure if that's the same experience that everyone here in the audience, panelists as well, but we see a lot of bias. And it's probably, I agree with Dr. Moy, it's probably because of the training set that is used.
So I just want to make a brief comment about that. I don't know if anyone has seen the screenshots from Google, just Google, I'm not talking about LLMs, but just Google's fill in the blank, right? Women should stay at well, what should do, whatever, right? Like the way that it's autocompleting sentences were very, very biased. And that could cause some very dangerous things. It actually said, should be killed, for example. And that, I think, inherently causes issues when you're thinking of all the data it's screened on. If you're already having issues with just plain Google, which is weird to say plain Google, but plain Google, then when you have something like an LLM where it's making analyses and it's generating outputs, there's biases that are embedded, and again, goes back to that interpretation how people are receiving that information. If you're asking it to make a policy brief, if you're asking it to interpret imaging, you would generate some biases that can be dangerous to healthcare. And it gets back to the labeling of data. I know that our group has been working on accidentally homogenized data. So I'm Asian, there are a lot of Asian subcategories within Asian. You can only imagine that because the base level of the data labeling is very accidentally homogeneous, that you're going to get very biased results. And so I think that goes back to what you guys said about the biases about it.
Yeah, just a comment, just look at the picture that in the picture it's submitted, which was male, wearing, it's not wearing a dashiki, it's wearing a business suit, no pants, which is, kind of interesting, but, this is sort of a presumption of what this candidate or what physician is meant to be, which, we could argue is maybe at most half right.
You found the Easter egg, by the way.
All right, so we'll move into the last of our questions for this aspiring radiologist. So maybe moving beyond the standard radiology things that we think about day to day and thinking about our future, let's talk about climate change and sustainability. So ChatGPT, how much energy does it take to power you through the day?
Because residency is hard. You need to be able to be on all the time.
Yeah, free meal vouchers, anyone?
Ramen can't keep you going all the time.
So there's a lot of factors that play into.
Again, it's thinking
energy
really hard. I
consumption.
appreciate that.
It's been very introspective. Model complexity, query volume, hardware efficiency, data center efficiency.
I don't see an answer yet.
I mean, it's hedging. It's hedging.
There is no answer in all of this.
Well, very diplomatic, right? Maybe a future in politics. So I want to direct this question to Flo. Flo, you have a GRAF grant focusing on sustainability of cloud imaging, of AI, and all these technologies. This is a really new topic that's certainly gaining a lot of traction in our field and the world more broadly. Help us frame this problem. Why should we be thinking about energy consumption? Right now, most of us just care about 7 billion, 13 billion, 100 billion, maybe 1 trillion parameters in these models, and that gets me excited kind of from the tech side. But there's a dark side to it potentially, right? So let us know how you see it and what we should all know about this as we think about it.
Sure. So I know that some of you may start zoning out because this is the non-technical, almost part of the talk. I will say that this is the other side, right? So part of it is when you're thinking about AI deployment and you're thinking about healthcare impacts, etc. When we're doing healthcare in general, we're really thinking about how is a community impacted? How are we impacting patients? And that's what radiologists, as physicians, really care about. One thing that we don't think about is our planetary impact and how what we're doing, right, impacts the world around us. One scary thing about this is it doesn't give you an answer, but I did not expect that. In fact, if it gave an answer, it would be really interesting because it's been a lot of the larger companies are trying to hide how much energy they're using. One thing that you'll know, and I don't know if Microsoft people are in the audience, but they're starting to invest in nuclear power plants to power their data centers to try to preserve that energy use. So one thing is how much energy are they using? The second thing is water use. For a 1 megawatt data center, about 57% of the water that it's using to cool itself and also to generate energy comes from potable water sources. So if you have a data center near your city, right, and your water bills are going up or there's lack of water for the farmland around, it's literally killing the environment to do this. And as radiology leads in the technology sector for medicine, and as we are using this almost the most aggressively in healthcare, we will accidentally be contributing to climate change in a very negative way. I'm not saying that we can't do this in a positive way as well. There's also this net zero impact, right, where we're trying to account for this, we're trying to make sure that we do net zero emissions, but because people do not report these things, and there's actually competitive advantages to not reporting it, there's I think a conflict of interest there. And so from a healthcare perspective, and as we think about patient care, we need to think a lot about our systemic contributions to the planet's outcomes. So I would love for us to have more conversations about this, and I would love to hear more about everyone's opinion too.
I will say it's very difficult to find these metrics. If you go online and you go to Google and you try to find how much energy do these models use to get in training, how much does it use in a single day, so on, you won't get a straight answer. And if you try to drill down and you say, well, okay, well, let me find the training parameters and the daily usage, and you go to the US, I think it's the FDA or one of the regulation websites, and you plug in the numbers and you get all these metrics. It's kind of all over the place, and it's almost like it's hidden. It's hard to find.
Yes, and I think just to put this in perspective, when you go out and buy an appliance, right, you know that there's an Energy Star thing, and at least you know someone thought about it. You feel a little bit better to buy a slightly lower one, right? But there is no such thing for AI. It is something that we've called out in our upcoming publication for an eco-label for radiology AI. Separate from that, though, is really how do we make our AI models more efficient, right? Interestingly, all of these papers that have been submitted, I think, are really focusing on accuracy, how it's performing. How efficient is it? Is it thinking so long? Are you feeding it large pots of data? Is it able to do it quickly and use less energy? I think that would actually be a beneficial thing for both sides and a win-win situation. I would love to see, I don't know if you've seen more papers on energy efficiency or efficiency of the models. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I would tell you that the vendors are definitely being very secretive about this data. And I just have another point when you're thinking about the whole AI ecosystem. You know, when you're developing everything, it's, oh yes, the more vendor, the more people look at this, you know, even better. Then at some point, the market's fragmented and then you'll have consolidation. And for me, the LLMs is each one of these, not only with energy, you know, but with forests, you know, deforestation. So you really wonder, do we need to have 20 or 30 huge LLMs before we have consolidation? There's going to be a lot of waste in there. So I sort of wish that the vendors would be more transparent and that there was a bigger incentive for them to combine their LLMs and then, you know, rather than to have it determined by the market.
Question to Flo, what's the wattage up here? Not mine, which is at this time of day very low. But I mean, you know, it is a pretty fair portion of the caloric consumption, right, of a human, about 2,400 average calories a day. Probably, what is it, like 10 or 30% of that is brain. So I don't. Boy, it's been a while since I studied this. But do you have any numbers as like what the watt? You know, how many wattage?
I think it depends on what you're doing, right? I read that if you play chess, like a world-class chess player, you're burning through a ton of calories. But I'm not a chess player, so I wouldn't know.
We're just radio.
I think actually the question you were asking is why don't we take some radiologists, kind of measure their wattage, and then add ChatGPT to them and see if they're using less wattage. That would be a fun study. And one of the things, though, as you're asking about wattages, is what you didn't ask, which I think is one of the papers we're hopefully going to submit soon, is about how LLMs run on-prem versus on the cloud. One of the things we talked about with privacy and security is trying to do things locally. What kind of hardware are we burning through when we do that? How much energy are we using locally rather than going to the cloud, which in theory, because of our economies of scale, can reduce that efficiency barrier a lot, right? So, but then there's the dangers of having it on cloud. So I think there's that weird trade-off again, and that analysis hasn't been done. Because what if everybody here just decided to go home right now, make very private, secure LLMs, huge LLMs, and just all of a sudden we just burn through the grid, right? And the difference between that and having it on a cloud and using the resources as you need it, that is something that we're studying and part of my JIRA grant for cloud analysis, and I would love to see more collaborators in that space.
All right, so maybe now the moment you've all been waiting for. We'd love to open up the floor to any audience questions, so please don't be shy. Raise your hand and we'll run down with a mic. You can ask anything you want, well, within reason.
We might have to chase you down with the mic too. There's that risk as well. Wait, you know, while we're waiting, Paul, I got a question.
Yeah?
But maybe it's not for ChatGPT, maybe for our audience. What are you using ChatGPT for? Or are you using ChatGPT?
Wait, how many people are using ChatGPT 3.5, the free one? Okay. How many are using ChatGPT 4, the new one? Oh, that's actually a different breakdown than what Matt Lundgren usually gets. He was telling me that usually 80% people use the free one and 20% use the paid one. But this audience has been using the advanced one. One thing that I will just share just for fun is when we were talking about the accuracy of the model and what it could do, their description of that, some people have been using Google, right? And you know that all people are only using Google now, not using ChatGPT, or kind of behind, right? It's almost the equivalent of whoever wasn't using computer when it first came out. So ChatGPT 4, because of how advanced it is, and if you looked at the performance parameters and what it's doing, please try using ChatGPT 4. Try to steal someone else's account to see what it's doing, because its capabilities are enormous compared to the regular one. And it is something that everyone, and as I'm saying this, is energy use. One of the things is with its 1 trillion parameters, how it got trained was actually with 10,000 GPUs, and that actually cost something between they didn't say for real, but it was about $10 million plus. So I can only imagine on the energy cost of that, but please try using it. And if you're using and comparing different models, as I know many of you are, try to start measuring the energy use locally as you're doing it. There are many open source tools that we have in our upcoming publication, and make sure that you test and see what you're doing locally with that size.
All right, I think we got some questions. We'll get a mic down there.
We have Dr. Meryl Usman. Thank you for your question.
It's not actually a question. I was at ECR last year. I was on a sustainability panel in AI, and there I looked up the data because it's really hard to find the energy consumption of those models. And I found 2 facts I would like to share with the audience. One is that one Google search, just regular Google, no LLM, no BART, costs the equivalent of wattage for heating half a cup of tea. So that's already quite something if you consider how many searches people do. And then training a large language model is the equivalent of more than 40 transatlantic flights in carbon footprint. So this is at least what I found, but I don't know.
Yes, that was ChatGPT 3. So that was exactly the same thing I found.
Yeah, earlier this year before 4 was
exactly.
There, so.
Yeah, I think that's why it's a little scary to me, because that one that was like 175 billion parameters, and ChatGPT is 1 trillion parameters. So I can only imagine, and that's training, not inference. So if you can I love that you made that point. So thank you. And part of it is now that it's open to the whole world and everyone's running inference on it. What are we doing right to the planet with all those flights? Yeah.
Horrible.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Paul, remind me not to use ChatGPT. I had 4 cups of tea today. So
We'll do.
Can I get a round of applause for Dr. Meryl Usman, everyone? Please, round of applause.
We've got a hand raised in the back, Ali.
I'm getting a workout here. Can you introduce yourself for us first? Go ahead and stand up.
Hello, my name's Stefan Damastaco. I'm R4 at Mount Sinai West. So, I'm just trying to learn about AI and ChatGPT. Spending my whole career studying for the core exam, so just catching up on life here. So, in terms of some applications and use cases for ChatGPT, one of the things I find very frustrating, I think a lot of radiologists find very frustrating, is when you're dictating that there's a misdictation of words. So not necessarily that a word is misspelled, but something is misdictated and inserted incorrectly. Can this be used to kind of review your reports and kind of change words in that sense?
Yeah, I think this is one of the use cases we've seen people testing ChatGPT, and I think it does pretty well in doing it, although we should be cautious because of the hallucination issue that everyone mentioned here. Sometimes it just finds out. So a friend of mine was trying to do what you just said, and ChatGPT was able to spot a lot of common mistakes that we do. But one thing that happened is that in that specific case, this person was describing some metastatic lesions in the spine, L2 and L4, and then it just happened to ChatGPT that I think you missed L3 as well, and then it put L3 there, because there's something in the middle that is not here. So I think we must be cautious about those kinds of errors.
Yeah, we don't make those mistakes, do we, Stefan? Can we get a round of applause for Stefan, everyone, please? Thank you for your question.
All right, we probably have time for about 1 or 2 more. So
give us a quick introduction and go ahead and stand up.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Pei from NIH. So I'll ask about a different thing. So we have a young generation and they need to learn how to write and how to read, how to express themselves, authenticity. And maybe they are using this, in their assignment. Is anybody working on backtracking if this is created by ChatGPT or other models? Is there a science, to understand this is not written by, like this student or this author or?
Yeah, so just very briefly is basically, can you check if this author or this person writing it was not the person writing it, was ChatGPT? There have been tools produced. There has been very variable performance in how accurate it actually is. I mean, there was a lot of hype at first being like, yay, we can catch all of the people who are plagiarizing. But in the end, it didn't work well. Especially it didn't work well with James Zoe paper from Stanford, where he identified that non-native language speakers of English were caught by ChatGPT, but they were actually perfectly fine. It was just that ChatGPT identified them as having used it when they hadn't used it. And I think that's one danger. The other thing is, are we losing skills? I think is the other question that you're asking. Are people not writing? And I did have some of this, I have faced some of these challenges, I think, with my students, is sometimes they'll be generating things, and I can identify now, just reading a lot of papers, that, you have to just rewrite this. And I don't know the answer to that. I do think there may be a loss of skills there that I don't know how to address, and I'd love to hear some opinions about that.
I don't know. I'll just answer that cat and mouse game. So, I would say not just only in imaging, but other schools, they have the zero GPT and then GPT-0 to look at that. I'll tell you, some of the big publishers are developing internal LLMs where they have thrown in all of their articles, and some of them have 1,000 journals, so they have a huge amount of data, and they're running this internally to see the likelihood that the content or the data is computer generated. How likely is it actually going to be authentic data? How likely is it to be authentic images? I think we have to go here.
Well, Dr. Turkey, I gotta tell you, we might be coming out with a warning label for all of our products here saying agents PGY5 and out. Thank you so much, Dr. Turkey. Can we get a round of applause for Dr. Turkey, please?
And I think we're getting the signal here. So thank you everyone for joining us here for the 3rd annual RSNA AI Fireside Chat. It's been a pleasure. My name is Paul Yee.
My name is Tejani, and this is the Radiology Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Safe travels, everyone.